المرسلين حبيب إله العالمين أبي القاسم المصطفى محمد وعلى آل بيته الطيبين الطاهرين صلوات. We continue with the holy verse in which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, سَنُرِيهِمْ آيَاتِنَا فِي الْآفَاقِ وَفِي أَنفُسِهِمْ حَتَّى يَتَبَيَّنَ لَهُمْ أَنَّهُ الْحَقُّ. We will show them our signs in the horizons and within themselves until it becomes apparent and clear to them that He is the truth. أَوَلَمْ يَكْفِي بِرَبِّكَ أَنَّهُ عَلَى كُلِّ شَيْءٍ شَهِيدٌ. Is it not sufficient for you that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, your Lord, it bears witness over all things? صدق الله العلي العظيم. Now, we got to a point in the last lecture where we were able to talk about evolution. So we spoke about several things, right? We finished criterion 1, 2, and 3 to prove the legitimacy of the Holy Book. We are now on the fourth criterion. And the fourth criterion to prove whether a message is truly from the Creator or not is that we said the message must have information about the universe that nobody else would know except for its Creator Himself. And so we said, obviously, from criterion number 3, we started focusing on the Holy Quran only. And we said the reason why is because the Bible and the Torah did not pass the first 2 criteria. So that's why we were focusing on the Holy Quran. So in the fourth criterion, when we look at the Holy Quran, what do we find? Let's take, for example, the chapter of An-Naba, chapter 78, verse number 6. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَجَعَلْنَا الْأَرْضَ مِهَادًا. He said, and we created the earth swaddled. Al-Mihad is basically a cover, a blanket that you cover a baby with. Our dear sisters and mothers know about this, right? Now, why is a baby wrapped up in this mihad? Can anybody tell me? To do what? To protect them, right, from the elements, to keep them warm, to keep their hands from scratching their face, because they're usually flailing their hands and their legs, right? So that means then that the description that Allah is giving us here is a very interesting one. Not only does it tell us that this earth is 3-dimensional, because you can't wrap something around someone unless it's in 3 dimension, right? Make sense? If it makes sense, say makes sense. Right? That's number 1. Number 2, so not only is it 3-dimensional, but also that it has some sort of cover covering it. And that cover is shaped in an ovular shape, just like a baby is shaped when they're wrapped with their swaddle. So we see what modern science has uncovered, and this was uncovered by Galileo, that the earth is actually 3-dimensional, right? And of course this occurred in the 16th century, and Galileo unfortunately was burned at the stake by the church because he made such a claim. Now, the reason why he was burned at the church and they accused him of heresy is because at the time the church believed that the earth was flat. Yeah. Okay. And this, somebody of his stature as a scientist coming out and making such a claim, basically was a threat to the church and to the government. And at the time, the church and the government were one, pretty much, right? Government was controlled by the church. This is why later on, in many years later, you find that Western society became secular, meaning that they separated the church from the state, because there was a lot of misinformation that they were getting from the church, and people were starting to get very disgruntled with the church, and so they ended up separating the two. And that's how, Europe, North America became secular because of that. So that's one, Galileo. Now, there was another scientist who also in the early 1600s, by the name of Sir Walter Gilbert. He uncovered the magnetosphere, that there's an actual magnetic field around the Earth. Today, if you Google it, the Earth's magnetosphere, what you will find is that the images that are depicted are the Earth, and then on one side you see around the round end of the magnetic sphere that's around the Earth, and that represents what would be, let's say, the head of the baby, and then the remaining part is ovular, almost like a wrapped body of a baby. Okay, so what is the role of this magnetosphere? It is to protect the Earth from cosmic phenomena, right? Such as starbursts, or such as cosmic flares, or for example asteroids, right? So then the Quran mentions this 1400 years ago. We weren't able to uncover this fact until the 1500s, in the 16th century. So who would have known this 1400 years ago except for the creator of this universe himself? If we look further into the Holy Quran, what do we find? That in the very next verse, in the verse number 7 of chapter 78 of An-Naba, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala states, after he says وَجَعَلْنَا الْأَرْضَ مِهَادًا, he says وَالْجِبَالَ أَوْتَادًا. He says, and the mountains, we made them like pegs, like stakes, meaning nails in the ground. And it wasn't until, as well, in the 1900s, early 1900s, that we were able to discover, to use sonograms to be able to, meaning using a sonar to be able to take a cross-section of a mountain. And what did we uncover? We uncovered that they're actually shaped like, the top of the mountain is shaped like the top of a nail, while the bottom of the mountain is shaped like a peg, right? Basically like a stake in the ground. Assalamu alaikum. So, who could have known this 1400 years ago, right? Except for the creator of the universe himself. We move forward, what do we find? We find also, when talking about mountains, if we look at tectonic plates, in the Holy Quran, in the chapter of An-Naml, chapter 27, verse 88, it says, وَتَرَى الْجِبَالَ تَحْسَبُهَا جَامِدَةً وَهِيَ تَمُرُّ مَرَّ السَّحَابِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and you look at the mountains, you think that they're still, but they move just as the clouds move. Now, it wasn't, it was Alfred Wagner who actually uncovered this scientific fact, and he named it continental drift. And this wasn't until the early 1900s, I think it was about 1915, that he actually discovered this fact, this scientific fact. Who could have known this 1400 years ago, right? That the earth, that there are tectonic plates, and that these huge mountains actually move. Right? If you also move forward and you look at also the chapter of An-Naba, verse number 12. What does it say? He says, وَبَنَيْنَا فَوْقَكُمْ سَبْعًا شِدَادًا, and we built above you 7 strong strata of sky. Right? It wasn't until also the early 1900s, about 1905, when two men, Robert Asman and William de Boer, I think his first name is William, but let's say his last name is de Boer, okay? French man, and a French scientist, and they uncovered the strata of sky. You know, that there's the Earth's troposphere, mesosphere, stratosphere, ozone, so on. So until you reach outer space. So they uncovered this only in the early 1900s. Who could have known this 1400 years ago except for the creator of the universe himself? This is mentioned in the Holy Quran. We move forward, we say, okay, well, what about, for example, in the chapter of Ar-Rahman, chapter 55, verse 17, okay? It says, أَرْضُ الْمَشْرِقَيْنِ وَأَرْضُ الْمَغْرِبَيْنِ. Here, the Quran says, the earth that has the 2 sunrises, sunrise, sunset, and the 2 sunsets, sunrise, sunset. Now, in order for that to happen, there's a circular motion. In order for this circular motion to occur, there has to be a central axis, right? About which the turning occurs, right? So what does that mean then? That means that the earth actually rotates around the central axis. You see, who uncovered this? Copernicus, right? Copernicus actually uncovered this in also the 1500s, right? In the 16th century. And he was also burned at the stake by the church. And not only did he discover this, by the way, he discovered also that the earth rotates around the sun. Is that interesting? And yet, this is mentioned in the Holy Quran 1400 years ago. How many years later was this uncovered? 1,000 years later. Did we have the technology to be able to uncover this scientific fact? Isn't that amazing? Now, let's move forward. Let's look at some more. And there are many. I'm only taking a few. Okay? Let's take a look at example at fingerprints. Fingerprints were in the Holy Quran. It wasn't until 1880 or 1882 that Sir Francis Galton, who was Charles Darwin's cousin, by the way, he discovers, as well as another German scholar, but it's mostly attributed to him, because we were, as humans, trying to figure out ways to identify human beings, right? We're trying to figure out what is the unique identifier for each individual. They tried ears, the size of ears. They tried the size of the limbs, the legs, the arms. Finally, they come to discovering the fingerprints. And it was Sir Francis Galton in 1880 or so that actually uncovered this fact. But in the Holy Quran, this is mentioned in the chapter of Al-Qiyamah, chapter 75, verses 3 and 4. أَيَحْسَبُ الْإِنسَانَ أَنْ لَنْ نَجْمَعَ عِظَامَهُ بَلَا قَادِرِينَ عَلَى أَنْ نُسَوِّيَ بَنَانَهُ. Does mankind think that we won't be able to resurrect him and bring him back in his form in the day of judgment? No, surely we will even be able to bring back his own fingertips. And this is a reference to fingerprints, as a specific identifier for each human being. Now you might say to me, well, Shaykhna, but fingertips, fingerprints. Say to you, okay, well, would you believe me that when I tell you that the Holy Quran actually has air travel and space travel in it? That it mentions it 1400 years ago? In the chapter of Ar-Rahman, chapter 55, verse 33. What does Allah say? He says, يَا مَعْشَرَ الْجِنِّ وَالْإِنسِ إِنِ اسْتَطَعْتُمْ أَن تَنْفُذُوا مِنْ أَقْطَارِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ فَانْفُذُوا لَا تَنْفُذُونَ إِلَّا بِسُلْطَانٍ. O nations of genies, meaning jinn, the other creations that Allah has created, and men, if you are able to leave the realms of the earth and the skies, then do so. But you won't be able to do so without my authority. Right? Now, when was it that the Wright brothers, it was also in the I believe it was 1903, that the Wright brothers were able to have that 120-second flight, right? That was the first air travel that would occur. And it wasn't until 1961 that Yuri Gagarin actually was able, the Russian cosmonaut, that he was able to leave the realms of the skies into outer space and do one whole orbit around the earth and then come back to earth, right? Who would have known this 1400 years ago? Except for the creator of the universe himself. So we find then the Quran also passes this fourth criterion. And what's remaining now is the last criterion, which inshallah we'll cover tomorrow, that the message must be miraculous. Until then we say Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen, wa salatu wa salamu ala Sayyid al-Mursaleen, wal Fatiha ala arwah al-marhumin, masbuqatan mashfu'atan, bis salati ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad wa ala